Hi, welcome back to Robert's Ramblings. Professor George Santayana of Harvard University once said, "Those who do not learn history are doomed to repeat it." Today, I want to demonstrate the truth of that statement. On January 6, 2021, a demonstration which was called in Washington, D.C. to protest the 2020 presidential election results turned violent and ugly. Lives were lost. The Capitol was breached and vandalized, and documents and other property were stolen. While we as a people sort out who was responsible, the causes of the violence are well known. There were lies told and propagated throughout the country about the election being stolen, and therefore the results should be nullified. There were many people in the crowd who were only there because they believed that falsehood, and they were there out of a sense of civic duty. Most of them did not participate in the attack on the Capitol. But within the crowd, there were dangerous hate groups and militias using military-style tactics for the breach of security. This is not up for debate. We have photographic and video evidence, and people are being and have already been convicted and sent to prison for insurrection. What all these groups wanted from the attack was to prevent the 2020 presidential election from being certified, and the nationwide results to be overturned in favor of the candidates they approved of. In other words, they wanted a coup that would set aside the Constitution and allow a white nationalist dictatorship under the former president to make whatever changes they deemed fit. Had they succeeded, which they would have done if the military and a majority of Congress had supported their efforts, we would no longer live in a democratic republic, and the fate of America and the world would have been very much in doubt. Thank God that didn't happen, but today I want to look at a very similar situation that actually did happen. But the outcome, because of the time and place in which it happened, was very different. And the negative consequences of that fight and its aftermath continued for decades. It was called the Jaybird-Woodpecker War. In 1820, Moses Austin received an impresario grant from Spain to settle Texas. He never got to act on it because Mexico soon won its independence from Spain, nullifying the grant. Then, in 1821, after Moses Austin passed away, his son, Stephen F. Austin, got the impresario grant from the new government of Mexico reinstated. Austin was already prepared to settle 300 families in what was called Austin's Colony in southeast Texas. That area is now mostly within Fort Bend, Brazoria, and Harris counties. In 1822, some of the original Austin Colony settlers decided to build a fort of sorts at the large bend of the Brazos River. This particular spot was also the best place in the area to ford the river. In fact, General Santa Anna later chose that spot to ford the river while in pursuit of Sam Houston's army of Texicans. A modest log structure was built, nothing like a real fort, but it was sort of a communal pied-à-terre, and it became the center for commerce and shipping for the area, as well as the social hub for the surrounding colonists. As a result, a town grew around it. They named it Richmond. The recent widow Jane Long, today known as the Mother of Texas, had been basically abandoned on Bolivar Peninsula by her husband, who was then killed while off on one of his expeditions. Stranded on the Gulf Coast, she became acquainted with Jean Lafitte, the infamous pirate, at a dinner in Galveston, and he aided her survival. Discovering her husband was dead, she left Texas, only to return with a land grant from Austin, despite land grants normally being given to men only. Once in Richmond, she claimed her league and labor of land. The league was measured in Mexican varas, but it amounted to 4,425 acres. The labor was an additional 177 acres. It was customary then to give landowners a labor, which was a parcel of land adjacent to the river, where they could build outbuildings, piers, launches, warehouses, and the like to ensure they could ship their goods and cotton to Galveston for shipment, primarily to the northeastern United States and England. Mrs. Long sold half her league and farmed the rest, becoming quite prosperous as a slaveholder and businesswoman. She owned 2 boarding houses, one of which was more like a hotel, which were visited by many suitors, all of whom she rejected, but some of them were famous men from Texas history. General, U.S. Senator, and first President of the Republic of Texas, Sam Houston, William B. Travis, Commander of the Alamo, Stephen F. Austin, Mirabeau B. Lamar, the second President of the Republic of Texas, and Ben Milam, a close friend of Jane Long's husband, James. Milam joined James on his military adventures and later died a hero in the Texas Revolution. The town grew and prospered for years because of its vast cotton and sugar-producing enterprises. But as it grew, the number of slaves grew. By 1860, the slaves in what was now Fort Bend County outnumbered the whites 2-1. That didn't seem like a problem to the white population then. But in post-Civil War Fort Bend County, it was seen as a huge problem for all the racist whites, especially the former enslavers. Richmond was the county seat of Fort Bend County and the center of county government. Since Lincoln and most abolitionists were Republicans, as were most of the Reconstruction overlords, the white population deserted the Republican Party and fled to the Democrats. However, since blacks were now allowed to vote, they significantly outnumbered their Democrat opponents, so elections for county offices were mostly won by blacks from both parties and their white Republican allies. A very few of the black office holders were tolerated by the white population due to their competence and fair-mindedness. But mostly there was anger, resentment, and occasional violence. By 1888, the situation reached a boiling point. White supremacy was disappearing in Fort Bend County. Violence was on the increase. The Texas Rangers were called in by the Republican group of office holders and seekers to supervise and police the November election. The Republican faction was called the Woodpeckers. The Democrats were called Jaybirds. There had been killings on both sides by then. Colonel B.F. Terry was a slaveholder and the leader of the Confederate 8th Texas Cavalry Regiment called Terry's Rangers. He was killed in action early in the Civil War. In a bit of irony, Kyle Terry, his son, was appointed county tax collector and was a member and leader of the Woodpecker faction. Go figure. As tempers flared, it was believed Kyle Terry had murdered a Jaybird leader named Ned Gibson, while Gibson was on his way to testify against one of Terry's friends in a cattle rustling case. Terry posted bail on the charge and went to Galveston. In Galveston, on the day of his preliminary hearing on the murder charge, he was ambushed and killed on the courthouse steps by Ned Gibson's brother Volney and some of his Jaybird friends. Retaliatory murders followed on both sides, leading to what is called the Battle of Richmond, which occurred on August 16, 1889. Clearly planned in advance, a mob of well-armed Jaybirds assembled in front of the county courthouse and demanded the Woodpeckers come out and face them. The unsuspecting Woodpecker office holders soon complied, and a group of 4 Texas Rangers and their sergeant rode between them and ordered everyone to stand down. African-American Sheriff Tom Garvey advised the Rangers to withdraw for their own safety, since gunfire seemed inevitable. At that moment, gunfire did erupt, and Garvey and his uncle and former Sheriff J.W. Blakey were shot dead. A Texas Ranger private, Frank Schmidt, was badly wounded and later died from his wounds, and a bystander, believed to be a young black girl standing on the sidewalk in front of the Moore home, was shot dead, either by a stray bullet or one fired in hatred. The Woodpeckers retreated to the courthouse, and the Jaybirds took up position in the McFarland house and the hotel across the street. The gun battle continued for 30 minutes, but white Democrats from all over the area had heard what was going on as word spread, and they were arriving in large numbers to join in the siege. It soon became apparent to the Woodpeckers that their situation was hopeless. They agreed to surrender. The fight resulted in 7 deaths. Texas Governor Sul Ross had been apprised of the events of that day and called for martial law. He ordered in 2 state militia units, the first formed in Texas after the Civil War, to move into Richmond and restore order. The Houston Light Guards arrived first, followed the next day by the Brenham militia. What followed next was astonishing, tragic, and thoroughly un-American. Governor Ross traveled to Richmond to see for himself what had happened. Upon his arrival, what he and the Jaybirds saw was a chance to restore white supremacy in Fort Bend County, and they took full advantage of it by nullifying the legitimate election and throwing all the duly elected officials out of office with no legal grounds to do so whatsoever. What they did have was sufficient force to do what they wanted. With Governor Ross's full blessing and with the backing of the governor's militias, after a meeting held on October 3rd, they ordered all the former office holders to leave town immediately for good or face dire consequences. Night riders, Klansmen, began to appear at black homes all over the area, telling the residents to get out or be killed. Apparently, Governor Ross, who stayed in Richmond for some time, had no problem with any of this. The Jaybirds held a meeting on October 22, 1889. There, the county government was reorganized under the control of the Jaybirds. A group of 400 Jaybirds signed up to create the Jaybird Democratic Organization of Fort Bend County, which dominated local politics for the next 6 decades. It was this group, with no legal or moral authority to do so, who declared the election to be nullified, and they appointed office holders from their own ranks who would effectively control the county government. Texas Ranger Ira Atten, who was on site during the battle, was appointed county sheriff. The Jaybirds established a white-only Democrat primary ballot for county offices, as well as other voting restrictions. This effectively disenfranchised African Americans and other minorities, because the only competitive races were within the Democratic Party. This racist law they passed, of course, was not a law at all, because those who imposed it had been elected by no one. And yet the law stood and was enforced until the U.S. Supreme Court struck it down as unconstitutional in 1953. Even worse, when it was first passed in 1889, the law served as a model for Texas, other counties, and other states who adopted similar laws aimed at maintaining white control of their public offices and legislative bodies. Does any of this sound familiar? The insurrection and election nullification in Fort Bend County were unconstitutional, but at least the damage was localized. The federal government was never in jeopardy. What do people think would have happened if martial law had been declared in Washington on January 6, 2021, as it was in Richmond in 1889? If the 2020 presidential election had been nullified, the nullification of many other state and local elections across the country would soon have followed. At that point, with millions of American voters disenfranchised, what options would the majority of Americans be left with? Chaos would reign. The Constitution would, for all intents and purposes, be gone, trashed. No Bill of Rights. The Supreme Court would be out of business. The Justice Department would either be shut down or turned against the people. The economy and our banking system would tank, and the U.S. dollar would be worthless. Our security would be gone as well, since our military would certainly split into warring factions, as a great many high-ranking military officers and their loyal troops would be forcibly removed for opposing the government takeover. We would withdraw from NATO, and one by one our allies would desert us. As NATO was being dismantled, our foreign enemies would be mobilizing everywhere to destroy us while we were weak. All of Eastern Europe and likely some of our other NATO allies would soon fall to the new Soviet Union. Our democratic way of life and adherence to the laws and principles of our Constitution are all that stand between us and extinction. Take a close look at those who have openly admitted that they want to destroy our government and our democratic way of life and ask yourself, if they succeed, who benefits? It won't be us. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, and come on back.